Somewhere in the dark between two stars, a ship is moving. It has been moving for longer than anyone aboard has been alive, longer than their parents were alive, longer than any name they still remember. Inside it, a child is born. This child will never see the star their ancestors left behind. It is back there somewhere now, just one more point of light among thousands, no brighter than the rest. They will never see the star their ship is aimed at either, not as anything more than a point, because at the speed the ship can manage the crossing takes thousands of years, and this child will live and die somewhere in the middle of it. They will never stand under an open sky. They will never see an ocean, or weather, or an animal that was not born inside the same metal hull they were. Earth to them is a word, a story their teachers tell, about a place no living person aboard has ever seen with their own eyes. This child is something new, the first of a kind of human we have never made before. And the question this whole video is about is what, exactly, we would have turned them into. Tonight we are going to follow a generation ship across the dark, from the people who choose to launch it to the people who are born and die inside it, and ask what really happens to human beings on a crossing far longer than any one of them can live. By the end of this you will understand why the ones who leave and the ones who arrive share almost nothing, why the children born along the way may be changed in body and in mind by a world with no earth in it, and why the whole purpose of the voyage tends to dissolve in the very generations it depends on. This is not a story about humanity reaching the stars. It is an honest look at what we would have to do to our own descendants in order to send them. If questions about where we are going and what it would really cost to get there are the kind of thing you came here for, a like or a subscribe helps more people find the channel, and it means a lot to me. The distance is the thing that breaks every comfortable picture of this, so start there. The nearest star to our Sun, Proxima Centauri, is 4.24 light-years away. That sounds almost close, a single digit, until you measure it against any speed a human machine has ever reached. Our fastest object, the Voyager 1 probe, has been flying outward for almost 50 years, and at its speed it would need around 70,000 years to cover the distance to Proxima. 70,000 years. Our entire recorded history, every city and language and written word, fits many times over inside the time it would take our best machine to reach the single closest star. A real generation ship would be built to go faster than Voyager, far faster, and it still does not save you. At a fraction of 1% of the speed of light, the kind of speed that is hard but not physically absurd, the crossing to Proxima still runs into the thousands of years. One careful study of what it would actually take put a slow voyage to the Proxima system at over 6,000 years. Even an extraordinary ship somehow running at a full 1% of the speed of light, faster than anything we have the first idea how to build, would need more than 400 years to arrive. At every speed we can seriously talk about, the crossing is longer than a human life. Usually it is longer than all of human civilization to date. So here is what that means, stated plainly, because it is the foundation of everything that follows. Nobody who boards the ship will live to see it arrive. Not them, not their children, not their children's children, not for dozens or hundreds of generations. The people who design the ship, who choose the destination, who stand at the launch and watch it go, are signing up for a departure with no arrival. They are the first link in a chain, and the chain is so long that the far end of it, the part that actually reaches another star, will be made of people they could never meet, speaking in ways they might not understand, carrying only a thin thread of shared blood and a fading set of instructions. This is the first place the romantic picture fails. We imagine a crew, a voyage, an arrival, the way a ship crosses an ocean and ties up in a new harbour with the same sailors who left. That is not what this is. The ocean here is so wide that the sailors who cast off all die at sea, and their descendants die at sea, and the great majority of every person who will ever live aboard is born at sea, lives at sea and dies at sea, having never seen either shore. The crossing is not an event that happens to a crew. It is a condition that swallows a population whole for as long as it takes, which is longer than any of them will ever be alive. Run the arithmetic of the generations and the scale of it lands differently. On a crossing of 6,000 years, with a new generation roughly every 25 years, more than 200 generations are born and die before the ship arrives. 200. To feel how long that is, count backward instead of forward. 200 generations ago, there was no writing in most of the world, no wheel in many places, barely a metal tool to be found. Everything we call history, every empire and invention and idea our species has ever had, fits inside that span. A generation ship asks an unbroken chain of people that long to be born, to live and to die inside one machine, holding to one purpose and never once stepping outside it. And the faster designs do not rescue the idea the way people hope. There have been serious proposals for ships driven by a string of nuclear blasts set off behind them, or pushed by enormous sails caught in a beam of light, and the best of them might reach a few % of the speed of light, which would cut the crossing to Proxima down to perhaps a century or two. But a century is still longer than a working life. It is still a voyage measured in generations, still a population born and dying in transit, and none of these ships goes fast enough to bend time in any useful way. At these speeds, the clocks aboard run very nearly in step with the clocks back on Earth, so there is no shortcut hidden in the physics, no trick by which the travellers stay young while the centuries race past outside. They have to live every one of those years, in order, one generation handing off to the next. There is a subtlety that makes the crossing even stranger. The destination is not standing still. Proxima Centauri is moving through space on its own path, the way every star is, so the ship cannot simply aim at where the star is seen to be now. It has to aim at where the star will be thousands of years from now, at the end of the crossing, leading the target the way you would lead a moving thing far ahead of you. The people aboard spend their whole lives travelling toward a point in empty space where a star is not yet, trusting a calculation made by the dead that the star and the ship will arrive at the same patch of dark at the same distant time. They are aimed not at a place, but at an appointment, thousands of years in the future. And the gap they cross is as empty as anything in nature can be. Between the stars there is almost nothing, on average a single atom in a space the size of your fist, a near-perfect vacuum colder than nearly anywhere, with no light but the distant stars and no help of any kind. If something goes wrong out there, there is no rescue because there is nothing to rescue them with and no one within years of reach to send it. The nearest star is the destination itself, and it is thousands of years away. For the whole length of the crossing the ship is alone, in a way nothing on Earth has ever been alone. A single warm lit speck of life crawling across an emptiness that does not care in the slightest whether it arrives. It is worth asking why anyone would build something so cruel, and the honest answer is that the physics may leave no kinder option. To push a ship full of people and farmland and shielding up to even a small fraction of light speed takes an amount of energy that beggars the imagination, and going faster takes vastly more, climbing steeply the closer you press toward the speed of light. We have nothing close to the power needed to send a heavy ship fast enough to make the crossing inside a single lifetime. If humanity ever does reach another star with its bodies intact, slow may simply be the only way it can be done, which means a generation ship is not one strange choice among many, but very possibly the only shape the trip can take. The cruelty is not a flaw in the design. It is what the distances and the energy budget force. People often reach for sleep as the escape, the idea of freezing the crew and waking them at the far end so that no one has to live through the centuries. But we cannot do that, not for years, let alone thousands of them, and there is no sign we are close. Freezing a human body and bringing it back unharmed is far beyond us, and a crossing of millennia would demand that the sleepers and their machines and the power to run them all survive, untended, for longer than any machine has ever run. And even if it somehow worked, Something would still have to keep the ship itself alive across all those centuries. The generation ship is what is left when you take away the escapes we cannot build. It is the honest version of the trip. And the honest version is the one where people are born and die the whole way across. And remember that Proxima is the easy case, the nearest star there is. Every other destination is farther, and the times only grow. The next stars worth aiming at lie tens of light years off, 10 or 20 or 30 times the gap to Proxima, which turns a crossing of thousands of years into one of tens of thousands. If Proxima turns out to be no good, and it may well turn out to be no good, the next option is not a little harder. It is a voyage longer than our species has so far existed, demanding not 200 generations but many thousands. The nearest star already strains the whole idea past what any human institution could plausibly survive. The destinations most likely to actually hold a livable world make even that strain look gentle. And the gulf is not only in years, but in everything that fills them. By the time the ship arrived, the founders would be as far back to the people aboard as the first farmers are to us, and probably further. Think how little we truly share with people 6,000 years gone, how alien their world and their words and their assumptions are, how much of them survives only as guesswork and broken ruins. That is the distance in time between the ones who launched the ship and the ones who might one day step off it. The arrivers would owe their very existence to the founders and would otherwise share almost nothing with them. No language they could speak together, no customs in common, no real memory linking the two ends of the chain. The ship would deliver not the founders' own people, but a separate people, descended from them roughly the way we are descended from the builders of the oldest cities, which is to say barely, and mostly in the blood. And we should be honest that all of this is still a projection. We have never built anything remotely capable of this crossing, and we are not close. Every speed I just quoted is a hope, not a vehicle. What is not a projection is the distance, and the distance is fixed, and it is the distance that sets the terms. The slower and more realistic the ship, the more generations the voyage swallows, and the more complete the gap becomes between the ones who leave and the ones who arrive. So if the founders never arrive, and the arrivers never chose to leave, then the obvious question is the one we have to follow next. Who actually lives this crossing, and what exactly did they agree to? The people who actually live the crossing never chose it. Only the very first generation, the ones who board the ship under their own power, are volunteers. Everyone after them is simply born aboard into a task that was decided before they existed, with no way off and no say in the matter. They did not sign up for the risk and the glory. They woke up inside it, the way you woke up on Earth, except that the world they woke up into is a machine pointed at a star, and the whole purpose of their existence was set by people who have been dead for centuries. And their lives are not free in the way a life on Earth is free, because they cannot afford to be. A small population sealed in a box for centuries faces a genetic problem that does not forgive carelessness. Breed without control, and the population either collapses into infertility and inbreeding, or overshoots the food and air the ship can supply. The detailed computer simulations built to study exactly this question, modelling crews across the full length of an interstellar crossing, find that survival depends on managing reproduction deliberately and continuously. Who is allowed to have children, with whom and how many, has to be planned and enforced for the entire voyage, generation after generation, or the whole population drifts toward extinction before it ever arrives. Put a number on it, because the number is sobering. Those simulations, run on a model built for multi-generational ships, found that the smallest crew that could survive the trip at all was around 98 people, and that to stay genuinely healthy across the centuries, to keep enough genetic variety that the arriving generation is not crippled by inbreeding, the starting crew needs to be closer to 1,000, and by some estimates several thousand. The design studies that take this seriously now plan for roughly 1,000 people sustained over the centuries of the crossing. 1,000 people sealed in, their bloodlines mapped and managed for as long as the voyage lasts. So a child born aboard inherits more than the mission. They inherit a set of rules written into their own body. Whether they may have children at all, and with whom and how many, is not theirs to decide in the way it would be on Earth. It is a matter of keeping the population viable, decided by a plan laid down generations before their birth, by people they will never meet, in service of a destination they will never see. Their most private freedoms are spent in advance, as part of the machinery of the crossing, before they are even born. To hold the genetics together, the plans lean on more than careful pairing. They carry a frozen bank of sperm, eggs and embryos from Earth, a vault of stored genetic material to be drawn on across the centuries to refresh the variety the living population keeps losing to chance and death. So the unborn of the ship are in part already aboard at launch, frozen, waiting, scheduled to become people at points along the crossing fixed by a plan. And it is not only reproduction that gets managed. In a sealed world where every role is essential and every mouth has a cost counted against the stores, the work a person will do, the place they will fill, is shaped by what the ship needs far more than by what they themselves might want. A life aboard is assigned, in a way a life on Earth is not. And sit for a moment with what the first generation is actually doing when they board. They are not only choosing the crossing for themselves, they are choosing it for every person who will ever descend from them. Hundreds of generations who do not yet exist and cannot be asked, committing all of them in advance to be born in a box in the dark and to die there. The founders make one free choice, and then they bind everyone who comes after to the consequences of it forever, with no way for any of those descendants to undo it or step out of it. It is one of the strangest moral acts a person could perform, to decide, on behalf of 200 generations of the unborn, that every one of them will live and die inside a sealed machine aimed at a star. And once the ship is moving, that choice can never be taken back, by anyone, for as long as the voyage lasts. Someone has to enforce all of this, which means the ship needs a power that reaches into the most private corners of its people's lives. Whatever form it takes, a council, a code, a custom, with the force of law, there has to be something aboard that decides who pairs with whom, who may have a child and when, and who may not. On Earth, such control would be called a tyranny. Aboard the ship, it is simply survival, because a population that breeds freely in a sealed space either starves as it outgrows the food or decays as its bloodlines narrow. The freedom to start a family where and when and with whom you choose, one of the deepest freedoms a person can have, is not available to anyone born into the crossing. It was spent at the launch by people making the numbers add up. And even with all of that control, the genetics stay fragile. A few thousand people is a thin pool to draw a healthy population from across 200 generations, and chance alone, the deaths, the accidents, the people who never have children, keeps grinding the variety down. The frozen bank of genetic material carried from Earth is meant to slow this, a reserve to refresh the pool. But it is finite, and it ages, and every draw from it is one that can never be made again. The simulations that model this find the crew walking a narrow line for the entire crossing, too small a population collapsing into inbreeding, and too large a one outrunning the ship's supplies. The margin for error across thousands of years is thin, and a few bad decades, a plague, a run of infertility, could end the whole line with no one left on Earth even aware that it had failed. And the population rules would be felt as real losses by real people. Somewhere aboard in every generation there are people told they may not have a child because the numbers do not allow it that year, or because their particular line is already well represented in the pool. There are pairings shaped or steered by what the genetics need, rather than by who loves whom. There are people who would have been parents on Earth and will not be aboard the ship, not because they cannot, but because a plan written before their birth has no room for their children. These are not abstractions. They are among the most intimate losses a person can suffer, repeated in every generation as a permanent condition of the crossing, borne by people who never agreed that their own family should be a variable in someone else's equation. And the very first generation carries a weight all its own. They are the only ones who choose this freely, and they choose it knowing they will never see it through. They will live their whole lives aboard, watch the earth shrink to a point and then vanish and die in the dark, having gained nothing for themselves but the knowledge that they began something. They give up the open world they were born on, trade it for a sealed ring, and get in return no arrival and no new world, only the first leg of a crossing whose end they cannot live to see. Whatever drives a person to make that trade, it has to be strong enough to give up a life under the open sky for a death inside a moving box, on behalf of descendants they will never meet and a destination they will never reach. And there is a word most people flinch from that sits quietly at the center of all this. To manage a population's breeding for genetic health across centuries is, in plain terms, to run a program of selection on human beings, deciding which pairings are allowed and which are not, shaping the makeup of the people to come. On Earth, that idea carries a dark history, for good reason. Aboard the ship, it gets recast as mere survival, the neutral arithmetic of keeping a small population viable. But it is the same act performed continuously on every generation by whatever authority holds the plan. The people aboard would be, to a degree no free population has ever been, a bred people, their very makeup the product of decisions rather than chance, with no more say in it than a child has in the fact of being born at all. And some of the passengers would spend the early centuries of the crossing frozen, not yet born at all. The bank of stored eggs and embryos carried from Earth is not only a genetic reserve, it is in a sense a hold full of future people, waiting in the cold to be brought into existence at points along the voyage that a plan has already fixed. A person might be conceived from that bank 3,000 years after the ship left, their parents long dead before their own life began, their very existence scheduled in advance by a calculation about genetic variety made by people who never met any of the parties involved. To be born at all aboard the ship can be a thing decided centuries before you exist, by arithmetic, for the good of a population. It is hard to think of a birth more thoroughly planned or less freely given. And there is an honest admission that has to sit underneath all of this, because it is the weakest joint in the whole idea. No human institution has ever held a single purpose across the number of generations this requires. No government, no faith, no company, no nation has stayed pointed at one fixed goal for hundreds of generations without changing beyond recognition or falling apart entirely. We are being asked to believe that a sealed population could do for the length of a voyage longer than recorded history, something no human society has ever managed, even with a whole planet to live on. Nothing in our history suggests it can be done, so set the question of will to one side for now and look instead at the world itself. What is the place these people are born into actually like? The ship is not a vehicle the people ride in. It is the entire physical world they are born into, and every part of it is finite, sealed and counted. There is no outside they can ever step into, not once, not ever. The air they breathe has been breathed before and scrubbed and returned to them. The water they drink is the same water, cleaned and circulated and drunk again, the same molecules cycling through bodies and machines for centuries. The food grows in a fixed patch of artificial farmland, sized precisely to the number of mouths the ship can carry, and nothing new comes in from anywhere, because there is nowhere for it to come from. Everything that will ever be aboard is aboard at launch. The crossing is a closed accounting, and the books have to balance every single day for thousands of years. There is no weather, there is no horizon, there is no day or night, except the lights that someone, generations ago, decided to switch on and off on a schedule, a borrowed rhythm with no sun behind it. And there is no gravity out there in the dark to hold anyone to a floor, so the ship has to make its own. And the only way to make it is to spin, The whole structure turns, and the spin throws everything inside it outward against the hull, and that outward push becomes the closest thing to gravity the people will ever feel. Down, for them, is not toward any planet. Down is outward, toward the wall, away from the center. That single fact reshapes the entire world. Because the floor is the inside of a spinning ring, it curves. Stand anywhere aboard and the ground rises away from you in both directions, gently, until far overhead where a sky should be. You see the far side of your own world hanging above you. Fields and corridors and lights, upside down, held to their own floor by the same spin that holds you to yours. Walk far enough in one direction and you arrive back where you started, having circled the inside of the ring. There is no edge to reach. There is no outside to walk to. The world is a loop, a few hundred meters across at most, and that loop is the whole of creation for everyone inside it. The numbers behind this are not exotic, which is part of what makes it real. To make a comfortable, full Earth gravity by spinning, without spinning so fast that people grow constantly dizzy, the ring needs to be something like 100 meters across in radius, turning a few times a minute. Spin it slower for comfort, and you need a bigger ring. These are the dimensions of a large building, not a planet, and inside that building lives an entire civilization that will never know anything larger. The detailed designs imagine a structure, a few hundred meters long, holding its 1,000 people, its farmland, its air and water, turning slowly in the dark. The closed accounting reaches even into death. On a ship where every atom was loaded at launch and nothing new will ever come aboard, the bodies of the dead cannot simply be put away and forgotten. The matter they are made of, the water and the carbon and everything else, is needed by the living, and so it goes back into the system, into the soil of the farmland and the cycle of the water and the air. The people aboard breathe air that has passed through the lungs of their ancestors, drink water that has moved through their bodies, and eat food grown in ground fed by the dead. On Earth this is also true, in a slow and scattered and easily ignored way. On the ship it is immediate and total and impossible to look away from. The dead stay aboard, folded back into the only world there is. And the spin that makes the gravity also bends the world in quiet ways that people would simply grow up taking as normal. Because the floor itself is moving, anything that leaves it does not travel in a straight line the way it would on Earth. Drop something from a height and it lands a little to the side of where it should. Throw something across the ring and it curves in the air. Climb inward toward the axis and you grow lighter with every step until at the very center you float free, the manufactured gravity gone to nothing. A child aboard would learn all of this as the plain rules of reality. The way a child on Earth learns that dropped things fall straight, never once suspecting that their whole world is a spinning drum, and that the curving and the lightening are the fingerprints of the trick that holds them to the floor. The one time we sealed people into a closed living world and shut the door behind them, it went wrong faster than anyone had expected. Inside the enclosed habitat, the oxygen in the air slowly fell, month after month, for reasons that took a long time to work out, until it had dropped to the thin levels found high on a mountain and had to be topped up from outside to keep the people within safe. Crops failed. Some creatures died off, while others bred out of control. The carefully balanced little world simply would not stay in balance, and that was a sealed ecology meant to run for 2 years on the surface of the Earth, with every expert on the planet watching and able to step in. The ship has to keep its world in balance for thousands of years, with no one watching who is not already aboard, and no hatch to open and let the good air in. And the world is small, which matters more than it first sounds. A few hundred meters of ring is the entire reach of a life. There is no taking a trip, no leaving town, no horizon to walk toward, no new place to go. The same faces, the same corridors, the same fields, the same view for the whole of a life and the whole of every life around you. On Earth, even a person who never travels still lives under an open sky on a planet they could in principle cross. Aboard the ship there is no in principle. The walls are the edge of the possible, permanently, and everyone aboard has seen every place there is to see long before they are grown, with nothing left anywhere that has not already been walked 1,000 times. Everything that on Earth simply happens has to be decided and held in place aboard the ship. The temperature is set by machines and would climb or fall to deadly extremes the moment they failed. The air pressure is held by the hull against the vacuum that is always pressing to get in. The light comes up and goes down on a schedule someone wrote, a borrowed day with no sun behind it, and there are no seasons, no storms, no shift in the weather, because there is no weather, only the steady hum of the systems holding the numbers where they have to be. Nothing about the world is given. All of it is manufactured and maintained by constant work, and every part of it is a single failure away from turning lethal. And the sealed world is poor in the small things a body quietly expects. There is no smell of rain, or soil, or the sea, only the filtered, recycled, faintly metallic air that has passed through the machines 1,000 times. There is no birdsong, no wind moving through trees, no sound of weather, only the steady mechanical hum of the systems that never once stops, the background note under every moment of every life aboard. There is no wild thing anywhere, no creature that was not loaded at launch and bred on purpose since, no plant that grows where it was not deliberately planted. The human senses took shape in a living, noisy, weather-filled world, and the ship hands them a clean, quiet, unchanging box instead. What that long sensory starvation would do to people, over a life and over generations, is one more thing we simply have no way to know. And the work of simply staying alive would never let up. A sealed world that must recycle every breath and every drop and every crumb and repair itself faster than it decays is a machine that demands constant tending, which means the lives aboard are shaped around its upkeep whether the people wish it or not. There is no economy of ease out there in the dark, no slack, no margin to coast on. Every generation has to produce enough hands to keep the air breathable, the water clean, the crops growing, the failing parts found and replaced, or the world begins to die around them. Life aboard is not so much a voyage being taken as a world being kept alive by hand, hour after hour, century after century, by people who never get to set the work down, because the moment the tending stops, everything else stops with it. And even the window is not guaranteed. A view of the stars is a comfort, not a necessity, and a ship built above all for survival might have little use for clear hull, where solid shielding would serve far better against the radiation outside. Some of these people might grow up with no direct sight of the dark at all, only screens showing what the cameras choose to show, or nothing, the outside an abstraction they are told about rather than a thing they can ever look at. A child could be born, live and die inside the metal without once seeing a real star with their own eyes. The entire universe beyond the hull reduced to a rumour, a reading on an instrument, a thing the old records insist is out there, the stars, which to us are the one constant of every clear night, might be to them less real than the corridors, known only second-hand, exactly like Earth. And in a world of a few thousand people sealed together for life, there are no strangers. Everyone aboard knows, or knows of, everyone else. There is no crowd to disappear into, no city of faces you will never see again, no chance of meeting someone wholly new. A person born aboard will meet, across their entire life, only the few thousand people the ship holds, and the descendants those people have, the same families turning over generation after generation. The endless human variety of a planet, the simple background sense that there are always more people, more lives, more strangers just over the next horizon, does not exist aboard the ship. The social world is fixed and finite and fully known by adulthood, closed in the same way that everything else out here is closed. And the deepest problem with this sealed world is that we have never actually made one that works. The one serious attempt to seal a small ecology away from the Earth, a closed habitat built to recycle its own air and grow its own food, ran into trouble within 2 years. The oxygen fell, crops failed. The balance the whole thing depended on turned out to be far harder to hold than anyone expected. That was for a couple of years, on Earth, with the whole planet standing by to help. A generation ship has to hold that balance for thousands of years, with no one to call and nothing to bring in. Whether a fully closed living world can be kept stable for that long is simply an open question, and the honest answer right now is that we do not know. Even the gravity in this world is a trick of motion, manufactured by spin. So what does it do to a human body to grow up inside conditions like these? Conditions a body never evolved to face. Deep space is hostile to the human body, and it bears down hardest on exactly the people a generation ship depends on, the unborn and the growing. Start with the radiation, because it never stops. Out beyond the shield of Earth's magnetic field, the ship sits in a constant sleet of galactic cosmic rays, particles flung out by distant dying stars and accelerated to enormous energies. Among them are heavy nuclei, whole iron atoms stripped bare and moving at nearly the speed of light. And when one of those tears through a human body, it does not pass politely. It rips a track through whatever it hits, through cells, through the delicate wiring of the brain, breaking the strands of genetic material as it goes. The dose out there runs at something like 150 to 300 milligray a year, year after year, for the whole crossing, and it is linked to cancer, to damage in the heart and the eyes, and to harm in the brain itself, in the regions that handle learning and memory. And you cannot simply wall it out. This is the cruel part of the radiation problem. Add shielding, pile on mass to block the particles, and past a certain thickness it gets worse rather than better, because the high-energy nuclei smash into the shield and shatter, spraying out a shower of new particles on the far side, so that the wall meant to protect the people becomes a source of its own. There is a thickness that helps a little, and beyond it you are feeding the problem. A ship cannot carry an unlimited mass of shielding anyway, not when every gram has to be hauled across light years. So the people aboard live inside that sleet for their whole lives, and so do their children, and so do the cells those children are built from. Then there is the gravity, or the lack of the real thing, and here the danger reaches all the way down to the beginning of a life. We have only just started to learn what microgravity does to the very first stages of making a new body, and the early news is not reassuring. The first mammal embryos ever grown in space, mouse embryos cultured aboard the International Space Station only a few years ago, did manage to develop, which was a real and surprising result. But they developed wrong more often than they should have. The embryos that should have formed a single clean cluster of cells split abnormally at around 25%, against 6 or 7% for the same embryos grown on the ground, the kind of error that in a real pregnancy raises the risk of loss. And earlier work on pregnant animals carried in space found harm to the developing organs of balance and to the growing skeleton, with the young showing higher rates of trouble. What all of that points to is simple and unsettling. A developing body appears to need gravity to build itself correctly, to know which way is up as it lays down bone and the organs of balance and the architecture of the inner ear. A child conceived and grown aboard the ship would be assembled in the wrong gravity, under that constant radiation, from the very first division of the very first cell. They would be built from scratch, in conditions no human body has ever been built in before, by a process that evolved over billions of years to run under a full Earth gravity that the ship can only fake by spinning. Even with the spin providing some pull, the body in space comes apart in ways we have measured directly on the people who have lived up there. In true weightlessness, bone wastes away at around 1 to 2% every month. Muscle withers and fluids shift upward in the body to press on the eyes and flatten the back of the eyeball, dulling sight. The heart, no longer pumping against a full weight of blood, grows lazy and weak. A spinning ship would push back against some of this by making a kind of gravity, but only out at the rim and only as steadily as the spin allows, weaker toward the center, never quite the even pull a body spent millions of years evolving beneath. The people aboard would be fighting a slow physical unraveling for the whole of their lives, and so would their children, and their children after them. The radiation, meanwhile, reaches the part of a person that is hardest of all to repair. The heavy particles of deep space drive straight into the brain, and in animals they have been shown to damage the regions that handle memory and learning, killing cells and fraying the connections between them. In a developing child, whose brain is still building itself day by day, the stakes are higher and the harm harder to undo. And some of that genetic damage does not stay with the one who suffers it. Injury written into the eggs and the sperm, into the very cells that make the next generation, can be handed down so that the radiation of the crossing is not only hurting the people alive now, but seeding damage into the people not yet born, building up down the generations in ways no one can fully predict or prevent. We do have one bright spot, and it is worth being exact about how small it is. Small fish called medaka were once bred aboard an orbiting station and produced apparently healthy young, the first vertebrates to complete a full cycle of reproduction in space. But a fish is not a mammal. A fish releases eggs into water, and the young fend for themselves with no womb, no placenta, no long gestation that depends on the steady pull of gravity to lay down a skeleton and an inner ear the right way round. The leap from a fish hatching in orbit to a human being conceived, carried for 9 months, born, and raised to a healthy adult across generations is enormous, and nothing we have done so far bridges it. We are at the very beginning of knowing, and the one thing we can say with certainty is that it has never been done with any mammal, and that a human child born aboard the ship would be the first test of whether it can be done at all. Add the radiation up over a whole life and the figures grow heavy. A dose of a couple hundred milligray a year, sustained for a lifetime, climbs into ranges tied to real increases in cancer and other damage, and the people aboard cannot step out of it, not for a single day, not ever. On Earth we work hard to keep people far below such exposures. Aboard the ship it is simply the background condition of being alive, soaked up by everybody from conception to death, generation after generation, with the heaviest particles leaving tracks of damage the body cannot always repair. Some fraction of the people aboard would sicken from it, and that fraction would be a fixed cost of the crossing, paid every century, with no way to bring it down. And the children raised in the ship's weaker, stranger gravity would not grow into the same bodies as children raised on Earth. Bone and muscle build themselves in answer to the loads they carry, and a body that never felt a full Earth weight while it was growing would lay down less bone and build less muscle and settle into a different shape. After enough generations, the people of the ship might be measurably altered, taller perhaps, or thinner, or weaker in the bone. A population slowly drifting away from the human baseline simply because they were grown in a force their ancestors never evolved beneath. They would still be human. But they would be human shaped by the ship, fitted to it, and less fitted to anywhere else. The body expects more from a world than gravity and clean air, and the ship cannot easily give it. A human being is not really a single organism, but a moving ecosystem, dependent on a teeming community of microbes built up through contact with soil and animals and other people and the broad living world. A child raised in a small sealed population, meeting only the narrow set of life carried aboard, would grow a poorer and narrower inner ecology, and the immune system, which learns by meeting the world, would have far less to learn from. Over generations, sealed away from the enormous living background that shaped us, the people aboard might become strangely fragile in ways hard to foresee, their defenses untrained, their inner life thinned out, their bodies missing pieces of the living context they were built to expect. And there is no sun which the body misses in ways past the obvious. Sunlight sets the daily clock that governs sleep and mood and the timing of the body's chemistry, and it drives the making of things the body needs and cannot easily get any other way. The ship can hang lights and run them on a schedule, and that helps, but it is a thin substitute for a star, and the sealed confinement test showed how readily the human clock comes apart, even with a schedule in place. A population raised for generations under artificial light, with no true day, no real sun, no sky to tell the body where it stands in time, would be running on a borrowed rhythm the body never fully trusts. Each generation a little further from a cycle that on Earth is simply handed to you at birth. And the first human beings actually born out there would carry the whole weight of the unknown in their own bodies. There would be no prior case to learn from, no way to know in advance whether a child conceived under that radiation, grown in that altered gravity, would develop a sound brain, a working heart, a body that holds together. The first ones born would be the test itself, and if something went wrong in the building of them, it would be found out the hard way in a living child, with no Earth to return to and no specialist anywhere to call. And whatever the first ship-born generation turned out to be, the next would be built upon it, and the next upon those, any harm or change compounding quietly down the line, the people drifting from the human baseline a little further with every birth, in a direction no one could predict and no one could undo. And when something goes wrong with one of those new bodies, there is little the ship can do. It carries no great hospital, no deep bench of specialists, no way to make medicines it did not bring, no link to the enormous store of medical knowledge left behind on Earth. A child born with some problem caused by the radiation or the gravity, a problem no one has seen before because no one has ever been built in these conditions before, would be met by a small crew working from stored instructions and dwindling supplies, many generations removed from the people who packed them. The ship cannot learn the way a planet full of doctors learns. It can only carry what it was given at launch, and ration it and watch it run down, while the conditions aboard keep producing problems no one ever prepared for. So I have to state the hardest unknown in this whole video plainly, because everything downstream depends on it, and it would be dishonest to slide past it. We do not know whether a human being can be conceived, carried to term, and grown into a healthy adult off the Earth. It has never happened. Not once. No mammal of any kind has been conceived, carried, and born in space, let alone a human, let alone generation after generation of them. The first child born aboard the ship is not just a new kind of person. They are an experiment whose outcome no one can predict, run on a living human being who never agreed to be the subject. Suppose, though, that the body manages it, more or less. Suppose the children are born and grow. What then happens to the mind of a person raised from the first day of their life inside a sealed box in the dark? Hath in the dark. Long confinement does measurable harm to the human mind, and the ship asks for confinement deeper and longer than anything we have ever tested. We do have one real test, and it is worth taking seriously. 6 people were sealed inside a locked set of modules for 520 days, the length of a round trip to Mars, with no way out and no fresh faces, and nothing to see but the same walls and each other. They were healthy. They were carefully screened volunteers, chosen for stability, who had agreed to be there and who knew the exact date the door would open and let them out. By every reasonable measure, this was the easy version of confinement. And still, their minds drifted. Over the months, their sleep came apart from the clock. The schedule said day and night, but their bodies stopped agreeing, sliding out of step with the lights until some of them were sleeping more and more, at the wrong times, their internal rhythm losing its grip on time itself, with no real sun to anchor it. They moved less as the mission wore on. They withdrew, into themselves and away from each other, growing quieter and more still. One of the 6 showed signs of depression in almost every single week of the mission, week after week after week, for the better part of 2 years. Now hold that result against what a generation ship actually asks. The people in that sealed test had every advantage. They were adults who had volunteered. They had a known release date circled on a calendar. They had the Earth a few seconds away by radio, voices from home whenever they wanted them, and the certain knowledge that real sky and open air were waiting for them on a fixed day. They had all of that, and their sleep and their mood and their drive still came apart over 520 days. The generation ship offers none of those mercies. There is no release date because the voyage is longer than a life. There is no Earth to call because within a few years the planet is out of reach of any real conversation, and within a generation it is gone. There is no door, and the people enduring it never volunteered for any of it. The difference is not one of degree, it is a difference of kind. The test subjects were enduring a hard thing they had chosen, with an end in sight. The people aboard the ship are not enduring anything, because to endure implies there is something else, a before and an after. A normal you are holding out for. They have no before. The box is not a hardship they are getting through. The box is the world, the only world, the entire stage of every life they will ever live. We have measured what 18 months of soft confinement does to selected volunteers, and it bends them. We have never measured what a lifetime of hard confinement does to someone born into it, because it has never been done, and the small tests we do have are not encouraging. The sealed test showed more than drifting sleep. As the months wore on, most of the friction the crew felt was not with each other, but with the controllers outside, the voices from the world they could no longer reach, and the conflict with the outside ran several times higher than the conflict within the group itself. The crew turned inward, and the world beyond the walls became a source of irritation and distance rather than comfort. 2 of the 6 accounted for the large majority of the tension that was reported. These were people screened and chosen for their steadiness, living under the gentlest possible version of the conditions, and they still frayed in clear and measurable ways once the door was shut and the months began to stack up. And that test is not alone in what it shows. We have watched people winter over in sealed stations through the long Antarctic dark, and crews live for months sealed inside submarines under the sea, and the same patterns surface again and again. Sleep comes apart, mood sinks, often worst in the long middle stretch, when the beginning is far behind and the end is still far ahead. People withdraw into themselves. Small irritations swell into large ones inside a group that can never get away from itself. These are the best mirrors we have for life aboard the ship, and every one of them is shorter, by years, than a single generation of the crossing, and every one of them ends with a door that opens and lets the people back out into the world. The ship has no such door, and no such end. And here is the part that none of these studies can reach. Every one of them was run on adults who chose to be there, who remembered the open world and knew they were returning to it. Not one of them can tell us what it does to a child to be born into confinement and raised in it from the first hour, never having known anything else, with no open world anywhere in their past and none anywhere in their future. We have no data on that at all, because it has never been done to anyone. The closest we can come is to say that the human mind appears to need things the ship cannot give. Light that matches a true day, room to move, a world that changes around you, and that stripping those things from grown volunteers for a year and a half already bends them in ways we can measure. What it would do to a person built inside that absence from birth and held there for a whole life, we honestly do not know. There is a pattern that turns up again and again in long confinement, and it bears directly on a voyage with no end in sight. People tend to sink lowest not at the start and not at the finish, but in the long middle, once the novelty of the beginning has worn off and the end is still too far away to feel real. On the ship, almost everyone lives their entire life in that middle. There is no beginning to look back on and no end to look forward to, only the same enclosed sameness, the same routines, the same recycled air and scheduled light, with nothing genuinely new ever arriving from outside, because there is no outside for anything to arrive from. The human mind is built to respond to change and to novelty, and the ship offers almost none of either. And every measure of harm we have is drawn from the wrong subjects. We have studied soldiers and sailors and screened volunteers, adults with full lives behind them and the open world waiting ahead of them. We have never studied, because it has never existed, a person born into a sealed metal world and raised there from the first day, with no memory of anything wider and no expectation of ever leaving. We do not know whether such a person would find the ship a prison or simply the shape of normal life, whether they would feel the confinement we would feel or never feel it as confinement at all, having nothing to set it against. That uncertainty runs both ways, and it is total. The single most important question about life aboard the ship, what it does to the people actually born into it, is one we have no way to answer. And there is nowhere to go when things go wrong between people. On Earth, when a relationship sours, or a feud festers, or a person becomes unbearable, there is space to retreat into, distance to put between you and them, somewhere else to be. Aboard the ship there is none of that. The same few thousand people, and in the working spaces the same few faces, for the whole of your life, with no way to walk away from any of them, no new town to move to, no stranger to begin again with. A grudge has nowhere to dissipate. A conflict has no room to cool. The sealed confinement studies already showed friction building inside tiny groups over mere months. A whole society shut in together for thousands of years, never once able to escape one another, would have to invent ways of living with conflict that no human culture has ever needed, because no human culture has ever been truly unable to leave. And underneath the broken sleep and the confinement there is a quieter danger, which is the simple problem of meaning. People need a reason, something the life is for, and the ship's official reason is a destination none of them will ever reach. On behalf of descendants none of them will ever meet. That is a thin thing to live a whole life on, and it grows thinner with each generation that inherits it second hand. A person on Earth can find meaning in 1,000 places, in a future they might actually see, in a world they can move through, in the open possibility of a life. A person aboard the ship has the ring, the work, the rules, and a goal that is centuries away and may not feel real to them at all. Whether human beings can live well, generation upon generation, on a purpose that pays out only to strangers long after they are dead, is not a question of engineering, and it is not one the ship can settle in advance. And there is the plain, grinding problem of sameness. A human life on Earth is full of small newness, a changing sky, a turning season, strangers, accidents, the endless variety of a whole planet to move through. The ship offers a fixed set of rooms, a fixed set of faces, a fixed set of tasks, repeating for a lifetime and across lifetimes. We do not know what an entire existence with almost no novelty does to a person, because no one has ever lived one, but everything we understand about the mind suggests it is not nothing. Minds starved of newness grow dull, or restless, or strange. A people raised across generations in a world where almost nothing ever changes might lose something we do not even have a name for, because we have never lived anywhere unchanging enough to notice its absence. And there is one thing every other hard human situation has that the ship does not, which is the hope of an end. People endure terrible confinement, terrible hardship, when they can tell themselves it will be over, that they will get out, that their children at least will have it better somewhere else. The ship cannot offer even that. For the people in the long middle, there is no end coming in any lifetime that matters to them, no way out, no better place waiting for their children, because their children will be born into exactly the same dark, and so will their children's children, for as far ahead as anyone can see, the one consolation that makes the unbearable bearable, the knowledge that this too will pass, is simply not true aboard the ship, and cannot be made true for anyone the crossing will ever hold in its middle. And there is one more turn of this that the test cannot reach at all. Those 6 volunteers had a home to miss. They had memories of weather and oceans and open sky to hold on to, a real place that existed and that they would see again. The children born on the ship would have none of that. They would have nothing to miss, because they would never have had it. So the question is not only what the box does to a mind that remembers the world, it is what happens to the idea of the world itself, to Earth, inside a mind that has never seen it and never will. Across the generations, Earth stops being a memory and becomes a myth. This is the center of the whole thing, the place the argument has been climbing towards, so let me state it directly. The first generation aboard the ship actually remembers Earth. They were born on it. They know the weight of real gravity, the smell of rain, the sight of an horizon with a sky over it, the particular blue of an ocean. They carry the planet inside them as a real place they have stood on, but they are the only ones who ever will. The second generation does not remember Earth. They only hear about it from parents who were there. The third generation hears about it secondhand, a story about a story. And by the 10th generation, or the 40th, Earth is not a memory at all. It is a thing in old recordings, a blue point in a stored image, a word that appears in lessons, a place that every ancestor came from and no living person has ever seen. Think about what those later children have actually experienced, stated plainly, because it is nothing like what any human has experienced before. They have never seen a sky that was not the curved hull of the ship overhead. They have never felt rain, because there is no weather in a sealed machine. They have never seen an animal that was not born aboard alongside them. They have never watched a sunrise, because there is no sun to rise, only the scheduled lights coming up on their timer. They have never stood at the edge of anything and looked out at a distance. Their entire reality, everything they have ever touched or tasted or seen, is the inside of the ship, a few hundred meters of metal and farmland turning in the dark. To a person like that, Earth is not home. It cannot be home, because home is the place you live, and they live here, in the ring. Earth is a claim and a history lesson, a planet they are told their species came from, as real to them as a story about a country that may no longer exist, or may never have existed quite the way the story says. They are asked to believe that there was once a world so large you could not see the end of it, with water you could not drink because there was too much of it, and air that simply went on forever with no hull holding it in, and a single light so bright it lit a whole sky. To them that might sound less like history and more like a myth, a tale the old people tell about paradise, impossible to check and hard to credit. And out the window, the proof that nothing is changing is right there in front of them. The same stars that hung in the black when they were born are still hanging there, in the same places, unmoved, because the view does not change across a single human life. We will come back to that stillness, because it matters more than it first seems. For now, hold only this. The children of the deep crossing are the first people in the history of our species for whom the human homeworld is a thing they half believe in, a rumour of a place, a word for somewhere none of them will ever go and none of them have ever seen. And the silence from home arrives early. In the first days, a message to Earth and its reply might take only a few years to cross the widening gap, slow but possible, a thin thread of contact still holding. But that thread stretches with every passing year. Within a single generation, a question sent to Earth and the answer that comes back are separated by decades, so that no real conversation is possible anymore, only a slow exchange of messages between people who will never be alive at the same point in the talk. And further on, the gap grows so wide that contact stops meaning anything at all. Earth does not cut the ship off, the distance does it, quietly, until the homeworld is no longer a place anyone can speak to but a faint old signal, and then not even that. All the later generations ever have of Earth is what was carried aboard at launch, a fixed archive of images and recordings that never grows, that only ages. A blue and white point in an old photograph, the voices and faces of people long dead, speaking of rain and oceans and open sky, in words that slowly stop matching how anyone aboard now talks. There is no way to check any of it, no way to see the place for themselves, no way to confirm that the world in the archive is real and not simply a story the founders chose to tell. Some aboard might come to hold Earth as something close to sacred, the lost garden their kind came from. Others might come to doubt it entirely, to suspect the whole thing was a myth from the beginning. Neither side could ever find out which of them was right. Even the records themselves slip out of reach. Language drifts steadily, without anyone deciding it should, so that the speech of the founders grows harder to follow with each century, and the writing they left behind, the manuals and the histories and the careful messages to the future, gradually becomes something closer to a foreign tongue that has to be studied rather than simply read. And through all of it, out the window, nothing moves. The same stars that hung in the black at launch are hanging there still, in the same places, for the founders and for their most distant descendants alike, because the view does not shift in 100 years, let alone in one life. The homeworld becomes a story, the records become a puzzle, and the one thing that stays perfectly constant is the unchanging field of distant lights that the ship never seems, from the inside, to be moving through at all. And it is not only Earth that turns into legend, the founders themselves do. The people who built the ship and chose the crossing, who are to the later generations the makers of their entire world, slide over the centuries from history into something larger and dimmer. They become the first ones, the ancients, names attached to a decision no living person ever witnessed, perhaps honoured, perhaps resented, perhaps half disbelieved like Earth itself. Whatever they intended, however they hoped to be remembered, they have no say in it once they are gone, and the story of who they were and why they did this drifts and changes with every retelling until it may bear little resemblance to the truth. We, the people imagining this ship now, would be those ancients. We would become someone else's uncertain myth. And think what the word outside would even mean to a child born deep in the crossing. To you, outside is where you mostly live, the open world under the sky. To them, outside is the vacuum, the killing cold and airless dark just past the hull, the place that means instant death, where nothing living can go. Outside is not freedom to them, it is death, the thing the walls hold back. The whole orientation of a human life is turned inside out. Inside is everything, safety and world and home. Outside is the end, and Earth, that fabled outside place where people supposedly lived in the open with no hull between them and the void, would sound to such a child not like home, but like an impossible tale, a place where people somehow stood exposed on the outside of everything and did not die. To the people born deep in the crossing, none of this would feel like a grand mission or a tragic sacrifice. It would simply feel like life, because it is the only life there is. They would not walk the corridors mourning an open sky they never knew, any more than you mourn the deep sea you cannot breathe in. The ring would be the world, complete and ordinary, and its rules simply the way things are, and that is its own kind of unsettling, because it means the strangeness we feel looking in at their lives is invisible from the inside. The thing we would call a deprivation, a whole human existence sealed in a box in the dark, they would call normal, the only normal they have, and they would be right, for them, which does not make it any less strange that we would have arranged it for them on purpose. Everything you take for granted as the background of a human life would be, to them, exotic or frightening, or simply unknown. The idea of more space than you could ever cross. The idea of a sky that is not a ceiling. The idea of stepping outside and living. The idea of weather, of an animal you did not know was coming, of a horizon, of a sun. To them these would be the contents of an old story about a lost world, while the things that would seem strange and harsh to us, the recycled air, the curved floor, the unmoving stars, the rules on who may bear children, would be the plain furniture of reality. They would be human beings whose entire sense of normal is the inside of a machine, and that, more than any single hardship, is what it would mean to have made a new kind of human. And the only Earth those later generations could ever meet is a fixed set of images that never change and never answer. A recording of a blue world seen from far away, faces of the founders speaking words that grow harder to follow with each passing century, saying that this is where you came from, that there was sky and sea and open air. A child could watch those recordings 1,000 times and they would say exactly the same thing every time, frozen, unable to confirm anything, unable to respond to a single question. Earth would not be a place to them so much as a scripture, a fixed text handed down from the ancients, believed or doubted on faith, with no way ever to test it against the thing itself. Unlike any scripture held long enough by people who can never check it, it would gather its believers and its doubters, both of them arguing about a world that none of them had ever seen. And the doubt would not even be unreasonable. Stand where a person born far into the crossing stands, ask to believe, on the word of old recordings alone, that there exists a world so large you cannot see its edge, where water lies in amounts no one could ever drink, where the air reaches upward with no hull to hold it, and somehow does not leak away into the dark, where a single light hangs in a blue sky bright enough to see by, and warm enough to live under, and where people walk about on the outside of everything with nothing above them, and do not fall and do not die. Every part of that contradicts the whole of their experience. It would be entirely rational, from inside the ship, to suspect that Earth was a comforting story the ancients made up, and there would be no way, ever, to prove the doubters wrong. And in the absence of the real thing, the people aboard would make their own meanings, the way people always do. New stories would grow up to explain the world they actually live in, the ring and the dark and the long crossing, stories shaped to a reality with no sky and no ground and no horizon in it. The old words for things that do not exist aboard, for rain and mountains and seas, might survive only as strange inherited terms whose meaning has gone soft, or might fall out of use entirely, lost because there was never anything left to attach them to. A whole language and a whole mythology would drift to fit the ship, growing as foreign to us as the ship itself, so that even if the founders and the arrivers could somehow be brought face to face, they might find they no longer shared words for the most basic things. The founders speaking of a world the arrivers have no concepts for, the arrivers at home in a reality the founders never lived to see. That is the turn, and it is worth saying what it really means. A generation ship does not simply carry humans across the dark. It changes what a human is. It produces people for whom Earth and the whole long story of everyone who lived and died on it, all of human history up to the launch, is mythology, a thing believed on faith if it is believed at all. And by the same stroke, it makes us, the people who built and launched the ship, into the half-remembered ancients of someone else's legend. We do not know how culture and memory and loyalty survive across this many generations cut off from their source, because it has never been done. The little we do know about how fast language and custom drift suggests that the founders and these distant descendants might barely be able to understand one another at all. So if Earth itself fades into a story, then we have to ask what happens to the one thing the whole ship was built to carry. So if Earth itself fades into a story the people aboard only half believe, then something has to happen to the mission, the single reason the whole ship exists. And in a little while I am going to show you who steps off the ship at the end, if anyone does, and why they may share almost nothing with the people who launched it, and may not even want the world they were sent to find. The purpose of the voyage tends to decay in exactly the generations that have to carry it. This is the quieter failure, the one that does not announce itself, and it follows directly from Earth becoming a myth. A goal chosen by the founders has to be handed down to people who did not choose it, cannot check it, and will not live to see it completed. With every generation that passes, that inherited goal thins out a little more. The descendants are not explorers straining toward a new world they can almost see. They are people living ordinary lives in the only place there is, and the destination is an abstraction to them, a name in an old file, a star they are told the ship is aimed at, attached to a long list of rules and labour and sacrifices that none of them asked for, and that all of them are simply born owing. Meanwhile, the ship itself is dying around them, slowly, constantly, the whole time. A sealed world is not a stable thing that sits still while the centuries pass. It is a machine under constant attack from its own use and from the radiation outside, and it requires endless maintenance just to keep existing. A world ship would need a relentless program of finding and replacing and repairing failing parts, on the order of several components somewhere in the structure failing and needing attention every second across the entire length of the crossing. And all of that work has to be done by people handing the knowledge down a chain of generations, none of whom built the ship, none of whom designed its systems, all of whom are working from instructions written by the dead. That chain is fragile in a way that is easy to underestimate. Knowledge degrades when it is passed down. Skills are lost when the last person who truly understood a system dies before fully teaching the next. Languages drift steadily so that the words and writing of the founders become harder to read with each passing century, until the manuals that explain how to keep everyone alive are written in something closer to a foreign tongue. The danger to a generation ship is not mainly the dramatic one, the mutiny or the disaster. It is this slow erosion, the forgetting, the gradual loss of the why and even the how, until the people aboard are tending a machine they no longer fully understand, pointed at a goal that no longer means anything to them. And at the end of that erosion is a particular kind of quiet failure. Not an explosion, not a death, just a ship that is no longer going anywhere in the minds of the people inside it. The destination becomes a forgotten line in an old record. The original purpose becomes a half-understood ritual, or nothing at all. The ship stops being a vehicle that is taking people somewhere and simply becomes the world, the place where people live, the way you do not think of the Earth as a vehicle taking you around the sun. It just is where you are. A crew that has forgotten it is a crew. On a voyage it has forgotten is a voyage. Tending a machine it half understands, drifting toward a star nobody aboard is really thinking about anymore. The deepest danger in the decay is not that a part breaks, but that the knowledge to fix it dies first. A ship like this runs on systems of enormous complexity, built by an entire civilization with all of Earth's industry standing behind it, and then handed to a few thousand people who have to keep it running with only what is aboard. When a system fails in a way the records do not cover, or in a way the people no longer fully understand, there may be no way to rebuild it, no factory to make a new part, no expert anywhere to call, only a shrinking supply of spares and a fading grasp of how the thing was ever meant to work. Each generation that does not completely master the ship hands a slightly poorer understanding to the next, and a sealed world cannot afford to forget how its own lungs work. And underneath the machinery there is the simpler problem of belief. No institution in human history has held a single purpose across the span this voyage demands. Charters are rewritten, founders are forgotten or turned into legends. The reasons a thing was begun are lost, and the thing either ends or becomes something the people who started it would never recognize. A generation ship asks the people aboard to hold one fixed purpose, set by strangers centuries dead, for longer than any nation or faith or order on Earth has ever held anything at all. The likely result is not loyalty and not open rebellion, but something quieter, a slow drift in which the destination stops being a goal anyone is really steering toward and becomes a line in an old file, while the ship itself becomes simply the world, the place where life happens, turning in the dark with no one aboard truly thinking of it as going anywhere. The only thing tying the later generations to the original purpose is a set of records, and records are weak things to carry a mission across thousands of years. A charter, a stored set of instructions, a library explaining what the ship is for, how to keep it running, and why anyone should bother. But records have to be read to matter, and read in a language that has drifted, and believed by people who have no way to check them, and obeyed by people who never agreed to them. A document cannot enforce itself. The further the ship gets from launch, the more the whole purpose rests on each new generation simply choosing to honor instructions from the dead, written in a tongue going strange about a goal they cannot see for reasons they have only ever been told. It would not take a rebellion to lose the mission. It would only take a few generations who stopped reading or stopped believing what they read. And the machinery does not forgive forgetting. A sealed world is a single linked system, air and water and food and power and structure all leaning on one another, and a failure that cascades through it has nowhere to be contained. On Earth, a disaster is local, and the rest of the world remains to help and to rebuild. Aboard the ship there is no rest of the world. A failure of the air, or the power, or the growing of food that the people can no longer understand or repair is not a setback. It is the end of everyone, with no survivors and no record. A small warm light going out in the dark between the stars, with no one anywhere to know that it happened. The crossing has to succeed completely and without a break for thousands of years, or it fails absolutely. There is no version that half works. And the forgetting would not feel like loss while it was happening, which is exactly what makes it so hard to guard against. No generation decides to abandon the mission. Each one simply knows a little less than the one before, cares a little less about a goal it cannot see, lets one more piece of the old knowledge slip because there was never any occasion to use it. The decay is invisible from inside, spread so thin across so many lifetimes that no one alive ever witnesses a fall, only the ordinary handing down of a slightly smaller inheritance. And then one day, centuries on, there are people tending a ship they cannot fully repair, aimed at a star they no longer believe in, following rules they no longer understand, with no memory that any of it was ever meant to be otherwise. Nothing dramatic will have happened. The mission will simply have leaked away, a little at a time, into the dark. And all of this rests on the ship simply continuing to work, which is the least examined assumption of the whole idea. We talk about the people, the genetics, the minds, the mission, as if the hull around them were a given. It is not. It is a machine, very likely the most complex machine ever built, and it has to run without a true stop for longer than any machine has ever run, repairing itself with only what is aboard, understood by people growing ever more distant from the ones who designed it. A single failure deep enough, a breach, a poisoning of the air, a collapse of the systems that grow the food, and the whole population is gone in the time it takes a sealed room to go bad. There is no reason to believe a machine can run flawlessly for thousands of years. There is every reason, from everything we have ever built, to think it cannot. And there is a strange irony folded into the whole thing. The better the ship works, the more completely it becomes a world in its own right, and the more completely it becomes a world, the less reason its people have to ever leave it. A ship that fails its people drives them to long for somewhere else. A ship that succeeds, that gives them a stable, livable, self-contained world, teaches them that the ship is home, that the dark is normal, that a planet is a strange and unnecessary idea. Success and the mission pull against each other. The very thing that keeps the people alive across the centuries, a world complete enough to live a whole life inside, is the thing most likely to make them forget or quietly refuse the reason they were sent at all. The crossing works best precisely when it has stopped being a crossing in anyone's mind. And consider the deepest strangeness of trusting a mission to records across a span like this. The instructions that explain why the ship exists, where it is going, and how to keep everyone alive would have to stay readable, believed, and obeyed for longer than writing itself has existed on Earth. Our own oldest writing is barely 5,000 years old, and a great deal of it we can no longer read at all. The ship asks its people to keep faith with a written word across a span comparable to the entire history of writing, in a language drifting the whole way, with the authors long dead and forever unreachable. We cannot read some of what our own ancestors wrote only a few thousand years ago. There is no reason to think the crew of the far future could read, or would heed, the founders any better than we read the people who first pressed marks into clay. Whether a multi-generational crew could hold on to both the will and the technical knowledge to actually finish the mission, across that many centuries, is genuinely unknown, and everything we understand about how people and knowledge and language change over time suggests the odds get worse the longer the crossing runs. So suppose, against all of this, that the ship does hold together. Suppose it does arrive. Who steps off it at the far end? And are they in any real sense the people the mission was meant to deliver? The people who finally reach the destination share almost nothing with the people who left. This is where the mid-roll question pays off, and the answer is not a triumph. The arrivers are not a preserved, rescued version of the founders, kept safe across the dark and delivered intact. They are the far end of a chain of hundreds of generations, every one of them born and raised in low or artificial gravity, under constant radiation, inside a sealed metal world a few hundred meters across. They have never known anything else, and that fact may have reached all the way into their bodies. A person whose every ancestor for hundreds of generations grew up in spin gravity, possibly weaker than Earth's, may simply not be built for a planet. Bones and muscles and hearts calibrated over a lifetime, and over many lifetimes of selection, to a gentle artificial pull, might be unable to cope with the full weight of a real world. The organs of balance, tuned to the peculiar physics of a spinning ring, might rebel on solid ground. After enough generations, the descendants might be physically unsuited to the very kind of place the whole voyage was meant to deliver them to, adapted instead to the only environment they have ever had, which is the ship. And the world they were aimed at was never a promise to begin with. Proxima Centauri b, the planet circling the nearest star, is the obvious target, and it is its own gamble. It orbits a small red star that is prone to violent flares, lashing its planets with bursts of radiation, and it almost certainly keeps one face turned permanently toward that star, the way the moon keeps one face toward the Earth, so that one side lives in endless daylight and the other in endless frozen night, with the star hanging fixed and unmoving in the sky over the lit half. This is the destination. Not a blue world with oceans and breathable air, but a tidally locked planet under a flaring red star, where the most you could hope for is a survivable strip somewhere between the burning side and the frozen one. So picture the actual arrival, stated as plain fact. After thousands of years and hundreds of generations, the ship reaches the star it was aimed at, and the descendants who arrive, shaped body and mind by the ring, look out at a real planet for the first time in their family's history. A sky with no ceiling, which to them is not freedom but a terrifying absence of any wall. A gravity that drags at bodies never built for it. A sun that is a sullen red flare lamp fixed in the sky over a world half scorched and half frozen. The open sky their distant ancestors dreamed of sending them to might be the single most frightening thing they have ever seen, and the planet's surface a place their bodies cannot survive. They might take one look at it and choose never to set foot there at all. By then, the ship is the only home that any living one of them has ever known, and a planet is the alien place. Look harder at the destination, and the gamble only sharpens. The red star at the center of the Proxima system is a violent one, given to sudden flares that can brighten it enormously in minutes and wash its planets in bursts of radiation far stronger than anything the sun ever throws at Earth. A flare like that, striking a nearby world over and over across billions of years, may well have stripped away most of its air and water long ago, leaving a planet that looks promising from light years off and turns out, up close, to be scoured and bare. We do not actually know whether Proxima Centauri b has held onto an atmosphere at all. The ship would be committed to that world for thousands of years before anyone aboard could ever find out. And the planet keeps one face turned always toward its star. One side bakes in endless day under that flaring red light, while the other is locked in endless frozen night, and the only place that might be bearable is the thin ring of permanent twilight between them, where the star sits forever on the horizon. That is the prize at the end of the crossing, if it is a prize at all, a strip of dim ground on a flare-scorched world, and the people who reached it would arrive in bodies shaped by hundreds of generations of spin gravity and weightlessness, bodies that might not be able to stand upright under a real planet's full pull, that might never once have known a force strong enough to make standing a struggle. They might have to remain aboard the ship for the simple reason that their bodies could not bear the surface. So the arrival might turn out to be no arrival at all. The descendants might reach the star their ancestors aimed at, look down at a tidally locked world under a flaring sun, feel in their own bones that they could not survive its gravity or its sky, and decide to stay exactly where they are. Why would they not? The ship is the only home any living one of them has ever known. The planet is the alien place, frightening and open and crushingly heavy, with a ceiling missing where a hull should be. The mission that launched to find humanity a new home might end with its descendants circling that home and choosing the familiar dark of the ship over the strange ground below. The entire purpose of the voyage quietly declined by the only people left alive to carry it out. There is another way this ends that is stranger still. The descendants who reach the star might not stop at all. To people for whom the ship is the whole world and a planet is a nightmare of open sky and crushing weight, the obvious thing to do on arriving might be simply to take what the new system offers, the ice and rock and sunlight, refuel and resupply, and carry on, choosing the ship over any world, perhaps forever. The mission to settle a planet could mutate, across the centuries, into a way of life with no destination at all, a people who live in the dark between the stars because that is simply what they are now, moving from system to system not to arrive anywhere, but to keep the only home they know supplied. The ship was meant to be a means to an end. It might quietly become the end in itself, and the planet be forgotten. And to those distant descendants, the target star is not a promised land. It is just a star, one more point of light that happens to be the one their old instructions name. They have never seen the world it was meant to hold. They have no memory of anyone who chose it, no feel for why it mattered, no sense of arrival as a thing to long for, because longing for an arrival means believing in the place you are going, and the place they are going is a line in a degraded file. The emotional pull the founders felt, the dream of a new world and a fresh start and a home for humanity among the stars, does not survive the crossing any better than Earth does. By the time the ship reaches its star, there may be no one left aboard who ever particularly wanted to. And so the founder's dream tends to arrive, if it arrives at all, as something its makers would barely recognize. They picture a triumphant landing, their descendants spilling out onto a new world to build a second home for humanity. What may actually come is a ship full of people who cannot survive the surface, do not wish to, and feel no pull toward a star that is to them only a name in a degraded file, choosing to drift onward or to circle in the dark rather than face the open sky. The dream and the outcome are joined only by a thread of blood and 1,000 years of slow decay. The founders would not know these descendants, would not understand their speech, would not share their fears, and might be heartbroken to learn that the new world they gave everything to reach was, to the people who finally reached it, the most frightening place they could imagine. And even in the best case, where the ship holds together and the descendants are willing and the world below is survivable, the arrival would not be the triumphant homecoming the founders pictured. It would be a small group of frightened, ship-shaped people, hundreds of generations removed from anyone who ever chose this, lowering themselves onto a strange and hostile world under a red and flaring sun, carrying a garbled memory of a mission and a half-believed story of a planet called Earth. If they survived, they would build something on the narrow twilight edge of a world locked between fire and ice that owed almost nothing to the people who launched them. The thread would have held barely, but what arrived at the end of it would be its own thing, shaped far more by the thousands of years in the dark than by anything the founders ever intended or could recognize. We do not know whether a generation ship would ever actually deliver people who could, or would, settle the world it was sent to. The destination might turn out to be unreachable, in practice even after the ship physically arrives, because the people who arrive are no longer the kind of people who could live there. So if the founders never arrive, and the arrivers can barely use what they find, then we are left with the hardest question of all. Who was the voyage actually for, and what were all those lives in between? The overwhelming majority of everyone who ever lives on the ship is born, lives and dies in transit. They see neither the world that was left behind, nor the world that lies ahead. Count the generations, because the count is the whole argument. On a crossing of thousands of years, the founders are a single generation at the very start, and the arrivers are a single generation at the very end. Everyone else, all the people in between, exist entirely inside the means. On a 6,000-year voyage, at roughly 25 years to a generation, that is more than 200 generations who live and die, having never seen either shore. So the actual shape of a generation ship, counted in human lives, is almost entirely middle. The first generation and the last generation, the ones the whole story is usually told about, the brave departure and the triumphant arrival, are a vanishingly thin slice of everyone the ship ever carries. For every person who watches the launch, and every person who sees the destination, there are dozens or hundreds of generations who see neither, who are born in the dark, grow up in the dark, raise their own children in the dark, and die in the dark. Their entire existence spent as one link in a chain, pointed at a place they had no hope of ever reaching. These are the people the romantic version of the story leaves out entirely, and they are nearly everyone. Their lives are not a prelude to the mission and not the fulfillment of it. They are not the departure and not the arrival. They are the crossing itself, the long middle that no single life can see the ends of, lived out in full, with births and deaths and loves and griefs and whole human existences, none of which were ever about anything those people could reach or witness. Whatever the mission achieves, if it achieves anything at all, it is built entirely on the backs of those numberless lives lived wholly in between. And here is the part that is hard to set down once you have picked it up. We tend to talk about a generation ship as a noble sacrifice, the founders giving up their lives so that humanity can reach the stars. But the founders are not the ones who pay. The founders choose and then they die, having made their choice freely. The ones who actually pay are all the generations who come after, who never chose anything, who inherit the sacrifice without ever agreeing to it, made on behalf of strangers who carry a little of their genetic material toward a goal that had stopped meaning anything to them many centuries before. It is a sacrifice, yes, but it is one made almost entirely by people who never agreed to make it, on behalf of people they will never meet. Stay with one of those in-between lives for a moment, because it is easy to lose the person inside the number. Someone is born aboard, in the dark, 3,000 years into the crossing. They learn to walk on the curved floor of the ring. They are taught the rules about who they may have children with, and they follow them. They do the work the ship assigns them, tending the air, or the crops, or the failing machines. They fall in love. They raise children of their own. They grow old, and look out the same window their whole life, at the same unmoving stars. And then they die, and their body goes back into the soil of the farmland, and their children take their place at the work and at the window. That entire life, every bit as full and as real as yours, happened wholly inside the means, 3,000 years from a launch they never saw, and 3,000 years from an arrival they will never see. Multiply that single life by the hundreds of generations who live one like it, and you have the real substance of a generation ship. Not the launch and not the arrival, but the immense and almost invisible middle, packed with complete human lives that were never about anything those people could reach. We call it a sacrifice for the future of our kind, and it is one, but it is worth being clear about exactly who makes it. The founders choose, and then they die, their part brief and freely taken. Everyone else inherits a sacrifice they never agreed to, and pays it in full, with their entire existence, on behalf of distant strangers carrying a thread of their genes toward a star that means a little less to each generation than it did to the one before. The cost of reaching another star this way is paid almost entirely by people who never got a vote and who never got anything back. Set this beside how we treat consent anywhere else, and it sits badly. We do not let people sign away the freedom of their own children, let alone their descendants 200 generations down the line. We do not accept that a choice made by the dead can bind the unborn to a life they had no part in choosing. And yet a generation ship is exactly that, raised to the scale of a whole population and a whole civilization, a single decision at the launch reaching forward across thousands of years to fix, completely, the entire shape of every life that will ever be lived aboard. If a smaller version of this were proposed plainly on Earth, we would call it monstrous. Stretched across the dark between the stars and dressed in the language of exploration, it can look almost noble, and that is exactly what makes it worth being careful about. The founders are making a bargain in which they get the choosing and the descendants bear the cost. They get the meaning, the sense of doing something great, the launch and the dream and the place in the story. They do not get the centuries of confinement because they will be dead within a single lifetime, comfortable in the knowledge that they did a brave and forward-looking thing. The bill comes due for everyone after, who never saw the dream, never felt the meaning, and never agreed to pay any of it. It is easy to launch a generation ship if you are the one who gets to launch it. It is the people you will never meet, the ones you have committed to being born in the dark, who actually make the crossing, and not one of them was ever asked. We tend to tell the story of a generation ship as the story of its founders and its arrivers, the brave departure and the hopeful landing, with the centuries in between treated as a kind of transit, a gap to be skipped over in the telling. But the people in between are not a gap. They are the overwhelming majority of everyone the whole project ever involves, and their lives are the real substance of it, the thing the enormous machine mostly consists of. To skip over them is to skip over almost everyone, to treat hundreds of generations of actual human lives as mere connective tissue between the only two generations the story finds interesting. They were not connective tissue to themselves. Each of them was a whole life, the only one they would ever have, lived in full, in the dark. I do not think there is a clean answer to whether it should ever be done, and I am not going to pretend the science hands us one. People who care most about the long survival of our kind will weigh the cost differently from people who care most about the consent of every single individual, and both of them are seeing something real. What I am sure of is that the cost is not what the heroic version claims it is. It is not a brave crew making a noble sacrifice. It is a few volunteers at the start, and then a nearly endless line of people who never chose anything, born into the bill the founders ran up, paying it with the whole of their lives, in the dark for strangers. Any honest case for a generation ship has to look straight at that and not hide it behind the launch and the landing. And the hardest part, I think, is that there is no villain in it. No one sets out to harm those generations. The founders, most likely, would believe they were doing something noble and even loving, securing a future for their kind, giving their descendants the stars. The cruelty is structural, built into the distances and the timescales, not into anyone's intent, which means it cannot be solved by good intentions, because the good intentions are already there. The problem is not that anyone wishes the in-between generations ill. The problem is that the only way to send people to the stars, slowly, with the bodies we actually have, is to spend those generations entirely, and no amount of care at the launch changes what the crossing demands of everyone in the middle. And I want to be careful not to speak of those in-between lives as though they were lesser, as if a life lived entirely aboard the ship was somehow worth less than a life on Earth. It would not be. Those people would love and be loved, would do good work, would raise children and bury their parents, would find the whole range of meaning a human life can hold, all of it real, none of it made smaller by the metal around them. That is not the problem. The problem is not that their lives would be empty. It is that their lives, full as they would be, were never asked about and were committed in advance in their entirety to a purpose outside themselves by people who would never have to live a single day of them. A full life spent inside someone else's plan is still a full life. It is also still spent. And so the real face of a generation ship is not the founder at the launch or the settler on the new world. It is the person in the middle, one of the countless, born at a window in the dark, who will never see a launch or a landing, who follows rules they did not write toward a star they will never reach, who lives a whole and ordinary and unrepeatable life inside a moving box, and dies and is folded back into the soil so that the next one can take their place. That person is what a generation ship is actually made of, almost entirely. Not heroes and not pioneers, just people, an unbroken line of them, spending their single lives in the dark so that the line itself can carry on towards something not one of them will ever touch. Whether that price is worth paying is not a question science can answer, and I am not going to pretend it can. People will weigh it differently, and reasonable ones will disagree. What science can tell us is exactly how large the price is, measured in lives, and the answer is almost everyone who ever lives aboard the ship. Not a heroic few, nearly all of them, across all those centuries, spent entirely inside the crossing. So what is it actually like to be one of those lives, born at a window in the dark, into a voyage too long for any single life to hold? For almost everyone aboard, the entire experience of the crossing is a view that does not change. The ship is moving faster than anything humanity has ever built, tearing through the dark at a speed that beggars every machine we have ever made, and from the inside it does not feel like moving at all. This is the strange, quiet truth that the whole video has been circling, and it is worth stating as plainly as I can. The stars are so far away that even at the ship's enormous speed, across an entire human life, they do not visibly shift. The arrangement of points out the window when a person is born is the same arrangement when that person dies. So follow one life all the way through in plain terms. A person is born at one of the ship's windows. As a child, they look out at a particular scattering of distant lights, fixed in the black. They grow up beside that window, and the lights do not move. They grow old beside it, raising children of their own who look out at the very same unchanging pattern, and the lights still do not move. They die, finally, an old person looking out at exactly the arrangement of stars they first saw as a child. The destination star no brighter, no nearer to the eye than it was on the day they were born. A whole human life, beginning to end, and the view never changed once. There is motion, of course. There is real motion, on paper, in the numbers, in the slow and genuine closing of an unimaginable distance across the centuries. The ship truly is crossing the gap between the stars, but that motion lives only in the arithmetic of the whole voyage, the sum of all the generations together. It does not live in any single life. No one person aboard, born and dead in the middle of the crossing, can feel the voyage as motion at all, because nothing they can see ever changes while they are alive to see it. For them, the crossing is not a passage through changing scenery, not a sense of going somewhere. It is a single still photograph that they are born into, live inside, and die inside, while the ship carries their descendants on toward a star none of them will ever reach. It is worth holding the two facts side by side, because together they are stranger than either one alone. The ship is among the fastest things our species has ever made, moving at a speed that would cross the whole of the Earth in seconds, and the people inside it feel no motion whatsoever. There is no wind because the air moves along with them. There is no landscape sliding past because there is nothing close enough to slide. There is only the hull and the lights on their fixed schedule, and out the window the same scattering of distant points, holding perfectly still, year after year after year. The fastest voyage we can imagine felt from the inside as a complete stillness for the whole length of a life. And the same window serves life after life. The child who presses against it grows old before it and dies, and another child is born and takes the same place, looking out at the same unchanged stars, and grows old in turn and dies and is replaced again. The window does not change, the view does not change. Only the faces at the glass change, one generation after another, each of them living a whole life in front of a picture that never moves, while the ship carries their descendants onward through a dark that, from the inside, looks exactly the same at the end of a life as it did at the beginning. That is the real texture of the crossing, for very nearly everyone who ever lives it. A single still image, and a long succession of lives spent looking out at it. Of everything the science says about a generation ship, that stillness is the part one find hardest to shake, because it is so quiet and so complete. We picture travel between the stars as the grandest motion there could ever be, a leap from one sun to another, and the lived reality of it, for very nearly everyone who would ever experience it, is the most total stillness a human being could know. No motion in the view, no change in the world around them, no sense of going anywhere at all, just a life, lived out at a window, in front of a black field of points that do not move, while the numbers on some half-forgotten instrument slowly count down a distance no living eye can perceive closing. And then you add the lives together, all 200 generations of them, each one born to that still view and dying before it ever changes, and you begin to see what a generation ship actually is. Not a voyage in any sense a person could feel, a chain of complete human lives, lived entirely inside a sealed machine, each one looking out at the same unmoving stars, handed from one to the next across thousands of years, so that at the far end a few strangers, who carry a little of the founder's blood, might arrive at a star the founders pointed them toward. Everything real about it, every birth and death, every whole life actually lived, happens in the still middle, in the dark at the window, going nowhere that anyone alive aboard could ever see. And maybe that is the truest measure of the distance to the stars, more than any count of light years. Not how far it is in miles, but what it costs in lives simply lived through. The gap to even the nearest star is wide enough that crossing it with human bodies means filling the crossing with whole generations who exist only inside it, who never see either end, who live and die at a window where the view never changes. The distance is not really measured in light years at all, in the end. It is measured in the number of complete human lives you would have to spend entirely just to carry a few of your descendants across, and the answer is very nearly all of them. And the people who built the ship, if they could somehow look forward and see the whole of it, would see almost none of the motion they thought they were buying. They would see the launch, and then a window, and a child at it, and that same child grown old at the same window, with the same stars behind the glass, and then another child, and another, life after life laid against an unchanging view, the whole long middle of the thing they started, where nearly all of its actual living gets done. They would not see an arrival, because they would be long dead before it, if it ever came at all. They would see exactly what everyone aboard sees, a still photograph of distant lights, and a long succession of human lives spent looking out at it, each of them going nowhere they could ever feel. And when I try to hold the whole of it in my head at once, that is the image that stays. Not the launch with its hope and its crowds, not the arrival, which may never come, just the long middle, the part that is almost all of it, a window in the dark and a face at the glass, and the same fixed stars behind it that were there before that person was born and will still be there after they are gone. Change the face, keep the stars. Change the face again, keep the stars. 200 times over, 200 whole lives set against a view that never once moves. That is what it would truly be, to send people to the stars the only way the distances allow. Not a voyage anyone aboard could feel, a still picture and a long line of people born to look at it. And the ship itself would not even mark their passing. It would carry on at the same speed, through the same dark, wholly indifferent, the systems humming, the lights coming up on their schedule, while inside it whole lives began and ended against the unchanging view. The stars would not dim for a death or brighten for a birth. The window would show the same thing to the grieving as to the newborn. Whatever happened to the people, the crossing would simply continue, because the crossing is not really for them, it is through them, and the only thing it asks of any single life aboard is that another one be ready to take its place at the glass when that life is over. That is the plainest fact in this whole video, and I think it is also the heaviest. The crossing is real. The destination is real. The motion is real in the long arithmetic of the centuries. But for the people who actually live it, the ones in the middle who are nearly all of them, there is no motion at all. There is only the same dark, the same hull, the same scheduled lights, and the same unmoving stars held still in the window for the length of an entire life. The ship goes somewhere. The people inside it, each of them, go nowhere they could ever feel. And then they are gone, and the window passes to the next of them, looking out at the same fixed points in the black. I keep coming back to the window and the stars that never move. On a crossing like this, the ship is racing through the dark faster than anything we have ever built, and from the inside, nothing changes. A person could be born at that window, grow old beside it, and die looking at the same scattering of distant points they saw as a child, the destination no nearer to the eye than the day they were born. A whole life lived inside the means to an end they would never reach. When I started thinking about generation ships, I pictured them the way most of us do, as humanity finally going to the stars, brave and bright and forward-looking. I do not see them that way anymore. What I see now is hundreds of generations sentenced to live and die in a sealed machine, in a lethal dark, for a goal they did not choose and would not live to see, so that some distant strangers carrying their genes might one day arrive somewhere those strangers may not even be able to survive. And the first child born out there would be the proof of it. The first human being for whom Earth, the only home our kind has ever had, is not a memory and not a home but a story, half believed, told under a sky that is really a ceiling. We would have made them that on purpose. Not to save them, but to use them as one more turn of a crossing too long for any single life to hold. That is the part one cannot put down. Not the distance and not the danger, the lives that would be spent entirely in between, at a window where the stars never move. If you want to keep following questions like this one out into the dark, a subscribe keeps the next one close, and you are welcome here any night.